And that is the kind of society I want to see.
Politics became compromised by the power that was unleashed by the new climate of enterprise. Thatcher and Tebbit had seen this sort of road to the New Jerusalem through freedom of markets and had unleashed it and had let it loose without, I think, without realising the kinds of all the sort of dangerous and damaging spin-offs that would happen.
But then suddenly, the Thatcher government came face to face with one of the other effects of deregulating the financial markets. And this time, it was an effect they couldn't ignore.
25, 26 the market, 25, 26 the market at the moment.
At the end of 1984, the government faced its first big currency crisis. Speculators on the international markets began to sell pounds and buy dollars because of high interest rates in the United States. There was nothing the government could do to stop them, and they watched helplessly as the pound slid to almost $1 on the foreign exchanges. And then it got worse. The richest man in the world, the Sultan of Brunei, announced that he was going to shift £10 billion to America. Mrs. Thatcher faced disaster. She turned for help to the Sultan's representative in London. She sent her private secretary, Charles Powell, to see him.
Margaret Thatcher, during the crisis, she knows that the Sultan of Brunei is a friend of mine. Charles Powell coming, he met several times in my residence in Park Lane. Please, can you help us, because they're going to take the reserves, about 10 billion sterling, to one of the American banks. Can you help us? I took the plane, I stayed 2 weeks begging the Sultan. He accepted. I came back, called Charles Powell, he came to see me. I said, it's okay, the funds are not going to be moved. He was so happy. And then he said, Margaret Thatcher is very grateful, and please, in the next visit, when the Sultan comes here, you are invited to have a chat with her to Downing Street. I say,
Mohammed Al-Fayed now became an influential figure. He was invited to dinner at number 10. Fayed had made his money out of the oil price rise in the 70s. He had been a middleman, arranging enormous contracts in the Middle East. But now, in the new unstable world of global currency flows, British politicians needed someone like Fayed. He had a new kind of power, the power of international money.
It would be very hard to think of Mr. Macmillan, Sir Alec Douglas-Home, even I think Edward Heath, giving Mohammed Fayed the time of day. They wouldn't even have received him at number 10. The imagination boggles at the idea that somebody of Mr. Al-Fayed's, what shall we say, background would have had the red carpet rolled out for him. Now suddenly, a person who can be of assistance in adjusting the pressures of the financial international community on a sovereign government becomes, in a way, a player in his own right. He becomes somebody who makes the wheels go round, and you either let him down there with his lubrication, or perhaps you hit the buffers.
And Mohammed Al-Fayed now claimed his reward, Harrods. In early 1985, he made a takeover bid, and a grateful government waved it through without a murmur. Fayed paid £570 million in cash. The government did nothing to question where the money came from, or even whether it was legally his. They accepted the guarantees of an eminent merchant bank, Kleinwort Benson. The bank also had no idea where the money came from. They accepted Fayed's assurances that it was legally his money. And in turn, they received a huge fee.
I think Fayed was dishonest, and he succeeded in making those elements in the establishment permit themselves to be used as tools through greed and lack of scrupulousness. I think it showed that here is this outsider who should have had every disadvantage, was able by the manipulation of monetary forces to get to the very top, helped and aided by senior city firms who should never have done anything of the kind.
Tiny Roland now swore revenge. He was furious that Fayed had got the very thing that he wanted. He saw it as evidence that the Thatcher government was now at the mercy of the forces they had unleashed, the powerful global markets and a corrupt city of London who would do anything for money. He wrote Thatcher a letter accusing her of corruption and announced publicly in the Times, "I will not go away. You will see me in your dreams. You will need to take 2 Mogadon rather than 1 to get to sleep at night." In June 1987, Mrs. Thatcher was triumphantly re-elected for a 3rd term. But almost immediately, Britain was hit by an economic crisis that was to turn yet another ageing tycoon against her.
Good evening. It is a day that will be in bold print in history books. Black Monday, October 19th, 1987, when the stock market went into a free fall.
The crisis began in New York. A wave of panic swept through the stock market that shares, which had risen continuously for the past 4 years, were overvalued. A contagion of fear infected the world's markets. The next morning, when the London Stock Exchange opened, it immediately fell by 20%.
The sense on the floor, on our trading floor, it was doom and gloom. It's the end of the world. That was the big phrase. The end of the world, mate. This is it. Blood on the street. It was total sense of helplessness. There's nothing anyone could do. You can't control billions and billions of dollars worth of money. If the markets think the market is going to go down, it will go down. Governments are absolutely powerless.
Governments watched helplessly as the crisis rolled around the world. One after another, stock markets crashed. To many, it seemed as if governments, like Mrs. Thatcher's, had, through deregulation, created a force that was now overwhelming them. One of those who now became frightened was James Goldsmith. Since the crisis of the 70s, he had lived in America. He had made a fortune, asset-stripping corporations and manipulating the markets. But now he decided that the very thing that had made him rich had become a threat to world stability.
I think our financial system is extremely fragile. I think that you can see it in the way the volatility of currencies. You can see all sorts of weaknesses. I believe that the politicians, unthinkingly, have created a situation, a structure, whereby our financial system is dangerous and could create great problems for the real economy.
But things didn't go the way Goldsmith feared. The global economy didn't collapse. In fact, within 18 months, it had bounced back. The boom started again, driven upwards by a frenzy of speculation around the world, and no one quite understood why. But it was an ideal time to do takeovers, and Goldsmith was tempted out of retirement to try for one last deal. In 1989, he returned to London to announce a bid for the giant British-American Tobacco Corporation. The old asset stripper was going to do what he had done so many times before: break it up, sell off large parts, and make himself a fortune. He called it liberating the company.
It is taking companies which are being stifled under the bureaucracy of a large conglomerate and liberating them.
The men whose support Goldsmith needed to succeed in his bid were the anonymous managers who ran the pension funds. But this time, they refused to back him. The truth was that they were now so powerful, they no longer needed people like him anymore. Over the past decade, the pension funds had grown enormously, and they now dominated the stock market. Through it, they owned over 70% of British industry. Their one and only aim was to increase the returns for their pensioners. In the past, they had always backed raiders like Goldsmith because they increased profits by sacking workers and selling off anything that didn't make a profit. But now, the pension funds had learnt they could do this themselves.
We showed to the pension funds you could increase the returns to pensioners. If you sacked 1,000 workers and you got